I negate the resolution resolved. Developing countries should prioritize environmental protection over resource extraction when they're touring conflict. I offer the following definitions. Developing countries, a poor agricultural country that is seeking to become more advanced economically and socially. Environmental protection, policies and procedures aimed at conserving the natural resources, preserving the current state of natural environment and its degradation. Resource extraction, to remove or withdraw a natural source of wealth or revenue. Before we begin today's round, one must know the following. Developing countries are the agents of the resolution because they're the only actor stated. So they're the only one who's making the decision to prioritize. And since the goal of the developing countries is to develop, to win today's round, one must prove the best form of development. Also, the developing countries are in dreadful situations. The Library of Congress 08. The majority of population makes far less income and has significantly weaker social indicators, lives on far less money and lacks basic public services. Since the resolution states taking prioritization, the negative can still carry out environmental protection, but resource extraction comes first in the developing countries. The highest value today's round is human rights. Every person has the right to life, security, and the right to development, DHR 86. The right to development is an inalienable human right by virtue which every human and all people are entitled to participate and contribute to and enjoy economic, social, cultural, and political development, in which all human rights and fundamental freedoms can be fully realized. To accompany my value, I offer the criterion of maximizing governmental legitimacy. To be legitimate, a government must look to its citizens first. Dr. Yokor, it is not only the right but the bound and solemn duty of a state to advance the safety, happiness, and prosperity of its people and to provide for its general welfare. Convention 1. Resource extraction is essential to uphold human life. Most of the people in developing countries are living in poverty. Shot 13. 80% of humanity lives on less than $10 a day. More than 80% of the world's population lives in countries where income differentials are widening. 22,000 children die each day due to poverty, and they die quietly in some of the poorest villages on earth. Disease is one of the major problems of poverty in developing countries. Still wagon 06. Outcome of poverty is worsening nutrition, chronic parasite infection, and limited access to medical care. And people are more susceptible to all infectious diseases, no matter how they're transmitted. Infections are more prevalent and more quickly fatal among poor people. The economy of the developing countries depends on resource extraction. FHC 13. The management of natural resources in developing countries is an important driver of sustainable economic growth, creates jobs and provides governments with revenue to deliver services to their citizens. Exports of oil and minerals from Africa, Asia, and Central and South America were worth over $1.4 trillion. Developing countries are increasingly looking at ways to tap into the enormous potential of the extractive sector to stimulate sustainable economic growth. Resource extraction leads to wealth in developing countries. More than 10. Example is Botswana. Great Britain has been among the highest in the world over the past 40 years. It's the country to build a relatively democratic policy and efficient institution. In addition, economic growth solves poverty. Figure 7. Only economic growth could have delivered the dramatic reduction in poverty that APEC achieved. The number of people in absolute poverty in East Asia and the Pacific had gone from 500 million people in 1990 to 200 million in 2003, with the hope that it could further be cut only to 20 million by 2030. Convention to developed countries should carry out environmental protection. Developed countries have the accessibility to solve for the environment compared to developing countries. Barron's 07. From 1980 to 2002, global extraction of natural resources expanded considerably. The wealthiest regions of the world are challenged to implement policies aimed at dematerialism, since they're responsible for a disproportionate share of global resource extraction and use in relation to their population. What is needed is the political will to implement such policies and to explore alternatives to currently unsustainable patterns of global resources use. I negate. Now let's move on to the affirmative side of the flow. Let's start with his value of societal welfare. He actually doesn't achieve his societal welfare, so you can his value. So you can turn that. You can extend Shaw here. 22,000 children dying each day. So it's specifically not helping the society, and also you can extend Fraser here. Only economic growth can have the poverty reductions, and that's like the most harming the countries right now. And also in this criterion of preservation, you can extend UDHR here. What we should look at today, like you can extend UDHR. Everyone has the right to development in life, and with the right to development, all other human rights are achieved. So yes, we're also preserving the preservation of developing countries, but that's only through the right to development, so that comes first. And also you can look to okay, now let's go down to his convention one. His convention one, basically you can group all of these things together. First he talks about all these bad things happening to the environment, but first he has no solvency whatsoever. He kind of talks about solvency in convention 3, but I'll get to that later. And you can also extend Barron's under my contention 2 here. The developed countries account for most of the environmental harm, so they should help out. And since they can, they will. So they are the ones who are harming the environment the most, so they should be the ones to help out. So that's actually a turn because I actually solved for it. And now let's go down. He talks about violence and stuff. He talks about violence, but first, turn economic decline causes war, royalty, and decline may increase the likelihood of external conflict in the global economy are associated with the rise and fall of preeminent power and the often bloody transition. Economic crisis could usher in redistribution of relative power, increasing the risk of miscalculation. Interdependencies are likely to gain benefits from trade so long as they have an optimistic view of future trade relations if the expectations of future trade decline. So actually, economic decline actually causes war, not the other way around. And even if you don't buy that, the risk chance of armed violence and violence is very low, and he doesn't really provide any specific countries where it has happened. So you can look to that. And also on his convention too, you can he talks about like the Dutch disease, uh, and stuff. So first, there's no solvency. He does not solve for it. And second, if there is no solvency, it's non-unique. And also, like, there's no evidence for resource curse isn't real. There's no empirical evidence. Wagner 11, a recent survey of resource curse literature concludes the proposition that all abundance induces extraordinary corruption, rent seeking, and centralized infringement, and that these processes are necessarily productive or and growth restricting is not supported by comparative or historical evidence. Also, if you buy resource curse, it only happens in small instances. It's not the main thing that you should look at in today's round. Also, the developing countries. So now let's go down to contention three. He talks about like this environmental pressure that's happening. But first, he gives an example of the United States. That's a developed country, so you can't look to that. Also, the Carta in 2010. Always there is ongoing development crisis. Any viable global climate accord must acknowledge and preserve the right to development. The South is neither willing nor able to prioritize emissions reductions above advancement. So first, what the goal of the developing countries is to develop, and if they have not developed at all, they cannot do the environmental protection. So the only way to actually protect the environment and help the people is through the negative. And I can't open for a class examination.
So first off, how exactly do you achieve governmental legitimacy?
Okay, so you can look at the Daughtry card here, and then it talks about how the state has to do like the best that it can, like, to help the people and
Okay.
protect the people, and that's only through the negative case because now you have to look at the UDHR card, no, the Library of Congress card, how the majority of population has like no money and the
Okay,
government
so
has no money. So first they should solve for that, and that's the
okay,
only way to actually
so
achieve
okay,
safety in the country.
so how do they obtain that money? Like, how do they become more wealthy?
That's my contention on the resource extraction.
Okay, so in what way would this money reach the people?
Okay. So that's the FATD card 13, where it talks about like how uh, the governments are like in Africa, Asia, Central and South America, like they're exporting all these sustainable economic growth, and the developing countries have enough revenue to deliver services to their citizens. So through
Okay,
resource
so this is
extraction, they get the
basically
money and then they give it to the
so in
people.
order for so in order for like the revenue to reach the people, it's like contingent on the government being able to distribute the wealth to its people. So
What?
so like so in order for this revenue, all the wealth that these countries gain through extraction, like isn't it still has distributed through the government? Like the government would manage that.
Government and other small like big entities.
Okay, so in the case of like corrupt governments, like what would happen? Like how would that solve for poverty in corrupt in countries with corrupt governments?
You have to look to Morrison 10 here, which talks about Botswana and how like it actually leads to a democratic policy. And if they are corrupt right
Okay,
now,
so is
you
like
still
Botswana
solve
the
for
only
it.
example? Is that just like only one country?
That's more than whatever the can offer. And that's enough.
Okay. So in your first contention, did you mention any like did you mention anything about mining or like extracting like mining? Was there anything about that?
No.
Okay. Wait. So in what way did Botswana obtain their wealth? Like what kind of resources did they extract?
Diamonds.
Okay. So what happens if they were like run out of diamonds and like they were really dependent on that, and exporting
There are other
revenue.
things. That's like the main contributor, but there are other
So there's other things. So like what happens in the case whenever a country doesn't have a very like large variety of resources, and then they all of a sudden run out of resources, like their economy was dependent on exporting that specific resource.
things. What?
Okay, so let's say a country focuses on exporting gold, extracting gold, and then they all of a sudden run out of gold, and that's what their economy is dependent on. What happens?
They find something else.
Okay.